I remember standing at the end of my driveway that morning, coffee mug in one hand, phone in the other, staring at $17,000 worth of white Range Rover parked diagonally across my driveway like some kind of entitled roadblock sent from the universe to test my patience. The October sun was just coming up over the rooftops of Maple Ridge Estates, painting everything in that golden light that usually makes you feel like everything is going to be okay. But nothing was okay. My hands were shaking so hard that coffee sloshed over the rim of the mug and splattered onto my slippers. The meeting I was supposed to be driving to in exactly 47 minutes was the biggest opportunity of my freelance career, a rebranding project for a regional restaurant chain. $15,000, the kind of contract that would let me finally pay off the rest of my wife's student loans and maybe take the kids to Disney World for the first time. And I was standing there in my bathrobe, watching steam rise from my coffee into the cold morning air, realizing that I could not physically leave my own property because Jessica Martinez had decided once again that the entire world existed for her convenience. I knocked on her door. I called her phone. I rang her doorbell 17 times. I know it was 17 because I counted each one like a meditation exercise, trying to keep myself from doing something I would regret. No answer. Her house sat 3 doors down, and I could see through her front window that the lights were off. Either she was sleeping through the most important morning of my life, or she simply did not care enough to acknowledge that she had trapped me in my own home. I found out later it was both. She had put her phone on Do Not Disturb because she had a late night and did not want to be bothered. My $15,000 contract, my family's financial breathing room, my professional reputation with a client I had been courting for 8 months, none of that registered on her list of priorities. I was an inconvenience, a mosquito buzzing around her perfectly curated existence. By the time she finally emerged from her house at 10:45 in the morning, stretching and yawning like she had just woken up from the most refreshing sleep of her life, my meeting had been over for 2 hours. The client had already called to tell me in that politely disappointed tone that somehow hurts worse than outright anger that they had decided to go with another designer, someone who could actually show up. I stood on my porch and watched Jessica walk to her Range Rover, check her reflection in the side mirror, adjust her hair, and drive away without so much as a glance in my direction. She had no idea what she had cost me. Or maybe she did, and she simply did not care. That was the morning I stopped being the reasonable neighbor. That was the morning I decided that if Jessica Martinez wanted to be famous, I was gonna make her famous. If you have ever had someone push you so far past your breaking point that you felt something click off inside your brain, some polite social switch that had been holding back a very patient, very methodical kind of anger, then you know exactly what I am talking about. If you have ever dealt with a neighbor who made your life miserable just because they could, let me know in the comments, because this story is for you. And if you want to see how a quiet, non-confrontational graphic designer turned his entitled neighbor into the most hated woman in our zip code, make sure you subscribe and stick around. This one takes some turns. Let me back up and tell you how we got here, because Jessica Martinez did not just appear in my life fully formed as an antagonist. There was a time, about 18 months before that October morning, when I did not even know she existed. And honestly, that was the golden age of my life in Maple Ridge Estates. I moved into this neighborhood 5 years ago with my wife Sarah and our then 2-year-old daughter Emma. We had been renting a cramped apartment in downtown Columbus for the first years of our marriage, saving every penny we could while I built my freelance graphic design business and Sarah worked her way up at the marketing firm where she still works today. When we finally had enough for a down payment, we spent 3 months driving through every suburb within a 40-minute commute of Sarah's office, looking for that perfect combination of good schools, reasonable HOA fees, and neighbors who seemed like decent people. Maple Ridge Estates checked every box. It was one of those planned communities built in the early 2000s, right before the housing crash, with mature trees lining every street and houses that looked different enough to have character but similar enough to maintain property values. Our house was a three-bedroom Cape Cod style with blue siding and white trim, sitting on a corner lot with a decent backyard where Emma could play. The previous owners had put in a vegetable garden that Sarah immediately fell in love with, and the basement was big enough for me to set up my home office with room left over for a playroom. The parking situation was clearly explained during our closing. Every house in Maple Ridge Estates came with a driveway and one designated street parking spot. The spots were marked with small painted numbers on the curb, matching your house number. Our house was number 47, so our spot was marked with a small white 47 painted on the curb directly in front of our property. It was in the HOA bylaws, it was explained during the community orientation, there were even little laminated cards mailed to every homeowner once a year reminding them of the parking rules. In 5 years of living there, I had never had a single problem. Neighbors respected each other's spots. If someone had a party and needed overflow parking, they knocked on doors and asked permission first. It was civilized. It was normal. It was what living in a nice suburban neighborhood was supposed to be like. Then, Jessica Martinez moved in. She bought the house 3 doors down from us in June, about 18 months before that October morning when everything came to a head. I remember the moving trucks arriving on a Saturday while I was mowing my lawn. Sarah brought Emma outside to watch because our daughter was going through a phase where she was obsessed with big trucks, and we stood there on our front porch eating popsicles and watching the movers carry furniture into the house that had been empty for 4 months since the Hendersons retired to Florida. The first thing I noticed about Jessica was her car, a white Range Rover, brand new, so clean it practically glowed in the June sunlight. The second thing I noticed was the way she directed the movers like a general commanding troops, pointing and gesturing and occasionally checking her phone without making eye contact with anyone. She looked like she was in her late 20s, maybe 30, blonde hair, expensive-looking athleisure clothes, the kind of person you see influencing something on Instagram. Sarah elbowed me and made a comment about how the neighborhood was getting younger, and I laughed and said something about how we were officially the old married couple now. We had no idea what was coming. For the first few weeks, Jessica was just a presence we noticed in passing. She worked somewhere downtown based on her commute schedule, leaving early in the morning and coming back around 6 or 7 most evenings. She kept to herself, did not introduce herself to the neighbors, did not show up to the 4th of July block party that the Changs hosted every year. A little standoffish, sure, but this is the Midwest, not the South. People are friendly, but they also respect privacy. I figured she was just settling in, adjusting to home ownership, maybe a little overwhelmed. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Then the parking started. The first time I noticed her Range Rover in my spot was a Thursday morning in late July, about 6 weeks after she moved in. I walked out to get the newspaper from the box at the end of our driveway, and there it was, that white SUV parked directly in front of the little painted 47 on the curb. My spot. I stood there for a moment confused because in 5 years this had literally never happened. I figured it was an honest mistake. She was new, maybe she did not understand how the parking worked, maybe she had gotten confused about which number was hers. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I wrote a polite note, stuck it under her windshield wiper, and went about my day. The note said, and I remember because I rewrote it 3 times trying to get the tone right, "Hey neighbor, I think there might be some confusion. This spot is number 47, which is assigned to my house, the Blue Cape Cod. Your spot should be number 44. Welcome to the neighborhood. My name is Marcus and my wife is Sarah. Feel free to knock if you have any questions about the area." I even drew a little smiley face at the end because I was trying so hard to be friendly. She moved her car that afternoon. I saw her pull away from my spot while I was on a video call with a client, and I felt a small wave of relief. Problem solved. Misunderstanding cleared up. Normal suburban life would continue. The next morning, her Range Rover was back in my spot. I found my note crumpled up on my front lawn, wet with morning dew, like she had read it, balled it up, and tossed it out her window as she drove away. At this point, I want to pause and ask you something. What would you have done? Because I wrestled with this for a while. I could have escalated immediately. I could have called the HOA that first week and started a formal complaint. But I had been raised to handle things person to person, to give people the chance to make things right before involving authorities or bureaucracy. My dad always said that most conflicts could be resolved with a handshake and an honest conversation, so I decided to knock on her door. It was a Saturday afternoon. I had rehearsed what I was going to say while I walked down the sidewalk, passing the Patel's house and the empty lot where the Hendersons' garden had gotten overgrown since they left. I was going to be calm, friendly, understanding. I knocked on Jessica's door with what I hoped was a neighborly rhythm, not too aggressive, not too timid. She answered after 3 knocks, holding her phone in one hand, barely looking up from the screen. Her house smelled like one of those expensive candles Sarah buys for special occasions, something with sandalwood and vanilla. Behind her, I could see a living room that looked like it belonged in a magazine, all white furniture and abstract art, and not a single item out of place. She was wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, and she looked at me with an expression that was not quite annoyance, but was definitely not welcome. "Can I help you?" she said, in a tone that suggested the answer she wanted was no. I introduced myself, explained about the parking spots, mentioned the HOA rules, pointed out that my spot was clearly marked and that hers was just a few doors down. I kept my voice pleasant, my body language open, everything I had learned from a conflict resolution seminar Sarah made me attend with her through her company. Jessica did not put her phone down the entire time I was talking. When I finished, she sighed like I had just asked her to solve a complicated math problem. "There is plenty of street parking," she said. "Just park somewhere else." I tried to explain that the spots were assigned, that it was part of the HOA agreement, that everyone in the neighborhood had been following this system for years. She shrugged. "I will move it when I feel like it." And then she started to close the door. I put my hand out, not to stop her, just a reflex of disbelief. "Wait," I said. "This is my assigned spot. It is in the rules. Can we just figure this out?" Jessica looked at my hand like it was something unpleasant she had found on her shoe. "Look," she said, "I am really busy, and this is not a big deal. Just park somewhere else." She closed the door in my face. I stood on her porch for probably 30 seconds, trying to process what had just happened. In my entire adult life, I had never had someone dismiss me so completely. It was not anger, not really. It was something worse. It was utter indifference. I did not exist to her as a person with legitimate concerns. I was just an obstacle between her and whatever she was scrolling through on her phone. If this story is already making you frustrated, hit that like button, because trust me, it gets so much worse. The pattern established itself quickly over the next few weeks. Jessica would park in my spot whenever it was convenient for her, which seemed to be most days. Sometimes it was just for an hour or two while she ran errands. Sometimes it was overnight. Sometimes she parked in the spot and left for an entire weekend, leaving me to either park in visitor spots 3 blocks away or squeeze my Honda Accord into the narrow gap between my driveway and Sarah's car in a way that made it impossible to open my driver's side door properly. Every time, I had to walk 3 houses down, knock on her door, and ask her to move. Every single time, she acted like I was the unreasonable one, like I was the one causing problems by insisting on using my own assigned parking spot. She had this way of sighing when she answered the door, this performative exhaustion, like dealing with me was the heaviest burden she had ever carried. Sometimes she would keep me waiting for 5 or 10 minutes before she came out to move her car, claiming she was on an important call or in the middle of something. Once, she told me she would move it in a minute and did not come out for 45 minutes, leaving me standing in my driveway like an idiot while I watched the garage where I could not park because Sarah's car was already in there and we only had a 1-car garage. The worst part was the way she made me feel small. I am not a confrontational person. I have spent my entire adult life avoiding conflict, finding compromises, being the reasonable one in every disagreement. And here was this woman, this stranger, who had moved into my neighborhood and decided that my comfort, my property, my peace of mind simply did not matter. It wore me down. I started dreading coming home and seeing that white Range Rover in my spot. I would feel my stomach tighten when I turned onto Maple Ridge Drive, craning my neck to see if she was there again. Sarah noticed. She told me I was grinding my teeth in my sleep. I went to the HOA in September, about 2 months after the parking started. The Maple Ridge Estates Homeowners Association met on the third Tuesday of every month in the community center, a small building next to the neighborhood pool that smelled like chlorine and old carpet. The board president was a retired accountant named Harold Chen who had lived in the neighborhood since it was built. He listened to my complaint with the patient expression of someone who had heard 1,000 similar grievances over the years. The process, he explained, was this. The HOA would send a formal warning letter to Jessica informing her of the violation. If she continued parking in my spot after the warning, they would begin issuing fines. The fine started at $50 for the first violation after the warning, then doubled for each subsequent violation. It was all very bureaucratic, very by the book. I left that meeting feeling hopeful for the first time in weeks. Surely, I thought, a formal letter from the HOA would get through to her. Nobody wants to pay fines. Nobody wants to be the problem neighbor with a file full of complaints. Jessica would get the letter, realize this was serious, and start parking in her own spot like a normal person. The HOA sent the letter on September 15th. I know because Harold emailed me a copy from my records. It was polite but firm, outlining the parking regulations, noting my complaint, and warning that fines would begin if the behavior continued. Jessica parked in my spot the very next day. I could not believe it. Part of me had been so sure that official documentation would change her behavior that I actually walked out to the spot and checked the curb to make sure it was still marked 47. It was. Her Range Rover sat there like nothing had happened, like the letter did not exist. The fine started, $50 for the first violation, then $100, then $200. I know because the HOA copied me on the correspondence. Jessica paid every single fine without protest. She did not appeal, did not argue, did not even respond to the letters. She just paid them and kept parking wherever she wanted. To her, the fines were not penalties. They were just the cost of doing whatever she wanted. $50 to park in someone else's spot? Worth it. $100? Still worth it. She had the money, and she had decided that her convenience was more valuable than the neighborhood rules and definitely more valuable than my peace of mind. Has anyone else dealt with someone like this? Someone who has so much money that consequences don't mean anything to them? Let me know in the comments, because I felt so powerless during this time. The system was supposed to protect people like me. The rules were supposed to mean something. But Jessica had found the loophole.
She could just buy her way out of accountability. The situation escalated in October when she started blocking my driveway. Not every time, but often enough to matter. She would pull up in her Range Rover, park in my spot, and angle her car just far enough back that the rear bumper extended across the edge of my driveway. The first time it happened, I had to back out in the most ridiculous way, turning my wheel all the way to the left, inching backward, turning the wheel all the way to the right, inching forward, doing a 17-point turn just to get out of my own property. I actually scraped my side mirror on her bumper because I misjudged the distance. When I knocked on her door to tell her about it, she told me I should have been more careful. After that, it got worse. The angles got more aggressive. Sometimes her car was parked so far across my driveway that I genuinely could not get out without hitting her, and Jessica knew it. I am certain she knew it. She had done the math, figured out exactly how far she could push, exactly how much of my driveway she could block, while still technically having most of her car in my parking spot. It was not careless parking. It was strategic. She was punishing me for complaining to the HOA. She was showing me that she could make my life difficult, and there was nothing I could do about it. I documented the driveway blocking, took photos with my phone, time-stamped, showing exactly how her car was positioned, submitted them to the HOA as additional evidence. Harold Chen told me that blocking driveways was actually a city code violation, not just an HOA matter, and that I could call the non-emergency police line to report it. So I did. The first time I called, an officer showed up 2 hours later and told Jessica to move her car. She smiled at him, apologized sweetly, and moved it immediately. The officer told me to call again if it happened again. It happened again 3 days later. I called again. Different officer this time, same result. Jessica moved her car, apologized, promised it would not happen again. The officer gave her a verbal warning, but no ticket. I asked about the ticket situation, and he explained that for a first offense, they usually just gave warnings. I pointed out that this was not a first offense, that I had called 3 days ago. He shrugged and said they did not have a record of the previous call in their system yet. This is what I learned during those months. The system is not designed for persistence. It is designed for people who make one mistake, get corrected, and never do it again. It is not designed for people like Jessica, who simply do not care, who can afford not to care, who understand that the consequences are annoying but not prohibitive, and who have decided that being the villain is preferable to being inconvenienced. Sarah and I talked about it almost every night. She would come home from work, see the stress etched in my face, and ask what Jessica had done now. I would tell her the latest story, the most recent outrage, and she would get angry on my behalf. But then she would ask what we could actually do about it, and neither of us had a good answer. We couldn't afford a lawyer, the HOA fines were not working, the police treated it as a minor nuisance. We talked about putting up cameras, about documenting more thoroughly, about maybe even selling the house and moving somewhere else. But why should we move?
We loved this neighborhood. Emma was thriving at the elementary school 2 blocks away. Sarah's commute was perfect. My home office setup had taken years to get right. Why should we uproot our entire life because one person had decided that rules did not apply to her? To everyone dealing with difficult neighbors right now, I want you to know you are not alone. This stuff is exhausting. It takes over your life. You start to feel crazy, like maybe you are the unreasonable one, like maybe you should just accept it and move on. But here is what I learned. Sometimes accepting it is not the right answer. Sometimes the only way forward is through. Which brings me to that October morning, the morning of the $15,000 contract. The morning Jessica blocked my driveway completely, parked diagonally like she owned the entire street, and cost me the biggest opportunity of my freelance career. I did not know yet that the contract was lost when I walked back into my house after failing to get Jessica to answer her door. I still had hope. I called my client, explained the situation, asked if we could reschedule. The person on the other end of the line, a woman named Patricia, who was the marketing director for the restaurant chain, was polite but firm. She said they had a tight timeline, that they had scheduled interviews with multiple designers that morning, and that if I could not make the 10 o'clock meeting, they would have to move forward with the other candidates. I begged. I actually begged. I told her I could be there in 30 minutes if traffic was light, that I was dealing with the situation, but I was handling it. She said she would wait until 10:15, but not a minute longer. It was 9:43. My driveway was still blocked. I ran to Jessica's house again, pounded on her door hard enough that the wreath hanging on it shook. No answer. I called her phone. I had gotten her number from the HOA directory months ago, thinking it might help me reach her faster when I needed her to move. It went straight to voicemail. Do not disturb. She had put her phone on Do Not Disturb. I stood on her porch, listening to her voicemail message in my ear, and something inside me finally broke. Not exploded, not shattered, just broke, like a bone that had been stressed too many times and finally gave way. I felt very calm, actually, calmer than I had felt in months. I walked back to my house, went upstairs to my office, opened my laptop, and sent Patricia an email explaining that I would not be able to make the meeting due to circumstances beyond my control. I apologized for wasting her time. I wished her well with the project. Then I sat in my office chair, staring at the wall, for about 2 hours. Sarah was at work. Emma was at school. The house was completely silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway that had belonged to my grandmother. I thought about every interaction I had ever had with Jessica, every polite note, every reasonable request, every fine that meant nothing to her, every police call that led nowhere. Every night I had ground my teeth into dust while she slept peacefully in her magazine perfect house 3 doors down. I thought about the life I had built in this neighborhood, the years of work, the savings we had scraped together, the dreams we had for our family. I thought about how one person, one selfish, entitled, utterly indifferent person, had the power to make all of it feel worthless.
And then I thought about what I actually could do about it. I am a graphic designer. That is my job. I create visual content that communicates messages, logos, websites, social media campaigns. I understand how images work, how they spread, how they make people feel. I had spent my entire career helping businesses build their public image. It occurred to me, sitting in that silent office, that Jessica had a public image too. Everyone does in the age of the internet, and that image could be shaped. It could be communicated. It could be spread. I pulled up my photo library and started scrolling through the pictures I had taken over the past 4 months. Jessica's car in my spot. Jessica's car blocking my driveway. Jessica's car parked across 2 spaces when the regular spots were not convenient enough for her. Timestamps on every photo. Dates ranging from late July to that very morning. I had not realized how many photos I had until I started counting them. 47. 47 separate incidents, documented with the obsessive thoroughness that comes from feeling powerless and wanting to prove to someone, to anyone, that you are not crazy. I made a decision that afternoon that changed everything. But before I tell you about it, I want to ask you something. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have kept trying to work within the system? Would you have given up and moved? Would you have done something drastic? Let me know in the comments what you think the right move was, because I wrestled with this choice for days before I actually did anything. The plan came together slowly over the following week. I started by doing research. I looked into what was legal and what was not when it came to publicly documenting someone's behavior. The answer, at least in Ohio, was pretty clear. You can photograph anything that is visible from a public space. A car parked on a public street is absolutely fair game. There are no privacy expectations on a public road. I double-checked this with my buddy Marcus, who's a paralegal at a firm downtown, just to be safe. He confirmed that as long as I was not trespassing on private property to take the photos, and as long as I was documenting facts rather than making defamatory claims, I was in the clear. Next, I created a Twitter account. I had never really used Twitter before, just had a personal account I checked maybe once a month to see what was trending. But I knew the platform. I knew how it worked. I had designed social media campaigns for clients who wanted things to go viral. The formula was simple. Relatable frustration, plus clear visual evidence, plus consistent posting, plus the right hashtags equaled attention. I called the account Parking Wars on Maple Ridge. The bio read, documenting one entitled neighbor's reign of parking terror in suburban Columbus. I did not use my name. I did not use Jessica's name. I used no names at all, actually. Just the facts, just the photos. The first post went up on a Tuesday evening in mid-October. A photo from 3 months earlier, one of the first times Jessica had parked in my spot. Caption, day 1 of my neighbor deciding that assigned parking does not apply to her. Note the clearly painted 47 on the curb. Her spot is 44, 3 doors down. The post included hashtags for Columbus, for Ohio suburbs, for HOA nightmares, for neighbor problems. I added a hashtag for our local neighborhood watch group and one for the city council member who represented our district.
Then I waited. The first day, nothing happened. 3 likes, probably from bots. I posted another photo the next morning. Day 2, she left her car here overnight. I documented 50+ incidents over 4 months. This is what entitlement looks like. Another handful of likes. A few comments from random accounts, mostly people saying things like, "That is so annoying and I hate neighbors like this." On day 3, I posted a photo of her car blocking my driveway. Caption, not only does she park in my assigned spot, she blocks my driveway so I cannot leave my own property. HOA fines mean nothing to her. She just pays them and keeps doing it. Tagged the local news stations, tagged the city code enforcement account, tagged every local hashtag I could think of. That evening, I got a message from a producer at one of the Columbus news stations. She said they were working on a segment about HOA conflicts in suburban neighborhoods and asked if I would be willing to be interviewed. I said yes. The interview aired the following week. They called the segment Parking Wars in Suburban Columbus and used my photos as B-roll while I sat on my front porch and explained the situation. I stayed calm, factual, reasonable. I talked about the HOA fines, the police reports, the months of trying to resolve this through proper channels. I talked about the $15,000 contract I had lost because I could not leave my own driveway. I did not cry on camera, but I came close. The frustration, the exhaustion, the feeling of being trapped in a conflict I never asked for, it all came out. Jessica was not named in the segment, but her car was visible in every photo. The distinctive white Range Rover, the personalized license plate that I made sure was slightly blurred but still recognizable to anyone who knew her. The neighborhood was identified. The general location was clear.
Anyone who lived in Maple Ridge Estates would know exactly who the segment was about. If this is making you feel something right now, hit that like button, because what happened next was better than anything I could have imagined. The segment went viral. Not internet-breaking viral, not millions of views, but viral enough for our area. The news station's clip got shared across local Facebook groups, neighborhood forums, the Reddit page for Columbus. People were outraged, not at me, at Jessica, at the entitlement, the indifference, the way she had used her money to buy her way out of consequences while making her neighbor's life miserable. Comments poured in. I hate people like this. This is why HOAs need teeth. Name and shame, this is the only thing that works. Someone in our city council should do something about this. The Twitter account exploded too. I went from 50 followers to 5,000 in 3 days. People started sharing their own stories. They tagged their friends, they tagged local politicians. A reporter from the Columbus Dispatch reached out and wrote a follow-up piece about HOA parking disputes that featured my story prominently. And then the part 1 had not fully anticipated happened. Someone figured out who Jessica was. I do not know how. I never posted her name, never posted her house number, never gave any identifying information beyond the neighborhood and her car. But the internet is a detective agency staffed by millions of people with too much time on their hands, and it took them less than 48 hours to connect the dots. Her name showed up in a comment thread. Her LinkedIn profile, which listed her job as Director of Public Relations at a mid-sized marketing firm in Columbus, was linked in a reply to one of my tweets. People started tagging her employer's account. They started leaving reviews on the company's Google page mentioning that their PR director was famous for entitled parking behavior. They started emailing the company directly. I want to be clear here. I did not ask anyone to do this. I did not dox Jessica. I did not share her name or her workplace or encourage any kind of harassment. But I also did not stop it once it started, and I am still not sure how I feel about that part. But here is what I know. Jessica worked in public relations. Her entire job was managing her company's image, helping them look good to the public, handling crises when bad press happened. And now, she was the bad press. Her boss, who I later learned was a man named Richard Donovan, who took the company's reputation extremely seriously, was not happy. Not happy at all. The fallout at her job was not something I witnessed directly, but I heard about it from neighbors who heard from other neighbors who knew people at her company. Apparently, Richard called Jessica into his office the day after her name got connected to the viral parking story. There was a meeting. There were HR representatives. There was a discussion about how a director of public relations being publicly associated with entitled anti-community behavior was not exactly great for the company's image. Jessica was not fired, but she was reprimanded, officially, in writing, with a warning that any further incidents that damaged the company's reputation would result in termination. I found out later that she had been up for a promotion. That promotion did not happen. If you think she deserved that, let me know with a like, because honestly, that part felt like justice, real justice. The kind of justice that the HOA fines and the police warnings and the months of polite requests never delivered. But we are not done yet. The viral attention had another effect I had not anticipated. The HOA, which had been content to send letters and collect fines while doing nothing substantive for months, suddenly decided to take action. Harold Chen called me personally to say that the board had held an emergency meeting and voted to implement immediate towing enforcement for parking violations. Not in a month, not after more warnings, immediately. Any car parked in a spot that was not assigned to them would be towed at the owner's expense, no exceptions. Jessica parked in my spot 2 days later. I don't know if she did it out of habit or defiance or because she genuinely believed that none of this would actually apply to her. But I was sitting in my home office when I heard the tow truck pull up. I walked to my front window and watched a burly guy in coveralls hook up her white Range Rover and drag it onto his flatbed. He did not hurry. He did not seem bothered by the neighbors who had gathered on their porches to watch. When I went outside, Harold Chin was standing on the sidewalk with his arms crossed, a small, satisfied smile on his face. "This is what should have happened months ago," he said. Jessica came home from work about 3 hours later. I wasn't watching for her. I was legitimately in my office. But I heard the scream, a high-pitched, rage-filled scream of pure frustration.
I looked out my window and saw her standing in my empty parking spot, staring at the space where her car used to be, her phone already out and pressed to her ear. It cost her $350 to get her car back from the impound lot. She had to Uber there and wait 2 hours for the paperwork to be processed. I know this because she told the story to another neighbor, apparently unaware that the entire neighborhood was now paying very close attention to everything she did. What would you have done in her position? Learned your lesson? Accepted defeat? Started parking in your own spot like a reasonable person? Let me know in the comments. Jessica parked in my spot again 48 hours later. I could not believe it. I actually laughed out loud when I saw her Range Rover sitting there in front of the painted 47, like she had learned nothing, like she believed she could still win this through pure stubborn persistence. I called the towing company myself this time. They were there in 20 minutes. $350 more to get her car back. She parked there again a week later. Same result. Third tow, third trip to the impound lot, third $350 gone. At this point, she had spent over $1,000 on impound fees alone, on top of the hundreds she had paid in HOA fines over the previous months. All to avoid walking an extra 30 seconds from her own parking spot to her front door. The third tow was the last one. I do not know exactly what changed. Maybe she finally did the math. Maybe the reprimanded work scared her more than she let on. Maybe she just got tired of being the villain in a story that the entire neighborhood was watching. But after the third tow, Jessica stopped parking in my spot. She stopped blocking my driveway. She started walking right past my house without making eye contact, like I was invisible, like none of this had ever happened. I want to tell you that I felt triumphant, that I pumped my fist in the air and celebrated my victory. But the truth is more complicated than that. Mostly, I felt tired. The whole thing had taken nearly 6 months from Jessica's first parking violation to her final tow. 6 months of stress, of conflict, of grinding my teeth and rehearsing conversations and feeling powerless against someone who had more money and less conscience than me. I had won, sure, but I had also spent half a year locked in a battle I never wanted against an opponent who should never have been my opponent in the first place. There was no parade, no medal, just an empty parking spot and a neighbor who pretended I did not exist. It has been over a year now since the last tow. I am writing this in my home office on a quiet Saturday morning, the same office where I sat and stared at the wall after losing that $15,000 contract. Emma is in the backyard with Sarah, planting spring bulbs in the garden. The grandfather clock in the hallway is ticking. Everything is peaceful. Jessica still lives 3 doors down. I see her sometimes when I am getting the mail or taking out the trash. She never speaks to me, never makes eye contact. Her Range Rover sits in spot 44, her actual spot, where it has sat consistently for the past 13 months. She had a baby a few months ago. I saw the car seat in the back of her SUV. Part of me wonders if motherhood has changed her perspective, made her realize that being part of a community means something, that other people's lives have value beyond what they can do for you.
But I do not really think about her much anymore. That is the thing about these kinds of conflicts. They feel all-consuming when you are in them, like they define your entire existence, like they will never end. And then they do end, and life goes back to normal, and you realize that most of what you worried about was temporary. The stress fades. The anger mellows. You water your garden and watch your kid grow and work on your projects, and forget, mostly, that any of this ever happened. If there is a lesson in all of this, I think it is about patience and strategy. I spent months trying to be reasonable, trying to work within the system, trying to give Jessica chances to do the right thing. None of it worked. What worked was making her behavior visible, making it public, making it impossible to ignore. The HOA did not care about my complaints until those complaints became a news story. Jessica did not care about fines until her boss saw her name in a viral tweet. The only leverage I had was attention, and once I figured out how to use it, everything changed. I think about that sometimes when I see stories about people dealing with injustice. The systems we rely on, the HOAs and the police departments and the HR offices, they are not designed for persistence. They are designed for easy cases, for people who back down after one warning. If you are dealing with someone who refuses to back down, you need different tools. You need visibility. You need the weight of public opinion. You need to make ignoring you more costly than dealing with you. That is what I learned from Jessica Martinez and her white Range Rover. I hope you never have to use that lesson, but if you do, I hope my story helps. To everyone who stuck with me through this whole thing, thank you. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next one. If you have your own nightmare neighbor story, I would love to hear it in the comments. We have got an amazing community here of people who understand what it is like to deal with impossible situations, and your story might help someone else feel less alone. Got your own parking war story? Drop it in the comments below. Where are you watching from today? Let me know what state or country you are in. I love seeing how far this community reaches. And if you think I did the right thing, if you think Jessica got exactly what she deserved, let me know with a like. It means more than you know. Until next time, take care of yourselves, protect your peace, and remember, sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous. Thanks for watching.